Hi, thanks for staying with us on SABC News. Let's take a look at what's moving the markets locally and internationally. So broader Asian shares rose today on market expectations that US interest rates have peaked. So the Hang Seng was up 1.9%. When we look at the Nikkei in Japan, up 1.7%, and the Shanghai Composite up by 0.94%. Let's go to the United States. Wall Street's major indexes closed higher yesterday after a choppy session. The release of minutes from the US Federal Reserve's last meeting helped fuel investor hopes that rates would stay steady. We also know that there was excitement about what's going to happen in terms of interest rates peaking and the Fed's more dovish tone. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average rising 0.19%, the S&P 500 up 0.4%, the Nasdaq Composite added 0.7%. All right, let's take a look at what's happening in the markets. We'll get some analysis from Ricardo Smith, the CIO at ABC Investments. He's going to be joining me for some analysis. We know that in the US, as I said a little bit earlier on, there's a thought that those US rates have peaked, and that's really affecting sentiment in global markets. Let's speak to Ricardo then. Ricardo, thanks for your time on SABC News this afternoon. Just how much of an impact does that thought that those US rates have peaked and also the Fed's dovish tone have on not only their markets but global ones as well?
Afternoon. Thanks for having me. It certainly has quite a huge impact. This has been one of the most aggressive monetary policy normalizations that we've seen, across the globe. The previous month was quite a terrible month for markets with a lot of pullbacks as participants, although expecting that we may have peaked, were actually anticipating interest rates to potentially stay higher for longer. Mm-hmm. So a lot of those long duration tech stocks are lagging quite a bit. We have seen a bit of improvement, in this month with some positive rallies, as you stated earlier, as markets are anticipating a slightly better inflation print and hopefully starting to see rate cuts a lot sooner than what they were pricing in, particularly given the Fed's comments in their previous meeting.
Okay, and so inflation data is out today. How are traders reacting to that? And just take me through what else is moving the markets in the United States.
Yeah, so that inflation print will be quite positive. We'll hopefully hope for a positive indicator from that inflation print. We have seen commodity prices and energy prices in terms of contribution to inflation coming quite low, but services inflation and food inflation has been quite elevated as we see second round effects to the broader economy. So that is quite crucial to see a good positive inflation print, not only headline inflation, but core inflation, which really speaks to the potential trend of inflation and not necessarily some of the cyclical elements. So that is really what we're for.
Ricardo, if we go to Asia, and let's focus on China for a little bit, there's been concerns about the growth in that country and the property sector as well. Earlier on, we saw that a state fund, investment fund, is increasing its stake in those big Chinese banks. That was a boost to confidence, but also murmurs that there's going to be measures around restrictions of outflows there that may dampen that confidence. Take us through what's happening there and in Asia.
For sure. So, China in particular has had a bit of a tough time from a policy perspective over the past 18 or so months. I think it started with the crackdown of a lot of these sectors, the shadow banking, fintech, et cetera, with heightened regulation. And so a lot of confidence had left that market, and a lot of the ways in which some of these companies used to operate, they can no longer do anymore. So this does somewhat bring a bit more confidence in terms of, reviving some of those sectors and maybe relaxing some of the regulations. But, from a market reaction, there's not a lot in it at this point. The proof is really in the pudding, and whether, these markets will continue to be able to innovate with a bit more policy certainty and policy support from China that's ongoing will be more, significant. The amount itself is not that high. They are taking up, but it is a positive signal, but still waiting to see, how they deal with innovation and some of the other regulations that they had put in place.
Take us through the JSE this afternoon at lunchtime. What's happening there? Anything interesting? And then please address those concerns around the kind of value that both local and international investors are seeing and getting from the JSE, and really quite big concerns there.
For sure. So there is quite a bit of value for investors on the JSE, but historically the JSE has often traded at more attractive levels than our global counters. But some of that value, can be justified by some of the risks that we have locally. Two of the largest that we've seen across all earnings and production updates have been the energy crisis and what that does to earnings and margins, as well as transportation in the railway sector. We are also starting to see some pressure from consumers, particularly with elevated interest rates. So impairments, across board starting to rise, and private credit extension starting to slow down. And what's important from a South African perspective is that the inflation that we are curtailing is mostly imported through the currency, whereas when you look at other economies like the US, it is consumer spending propensities that are driving it higher. So, general anemic economic environment, but certainly there is a bit of value, and we are seeing now, resources rallying quite aggressively. They are still down for the year, but we've seen gold prices and platinum prices supporting those with all the turmoil across the globe, and investors looking for some safe havens.
Okay. Ricardo, if we're looking at business news, what are you finding interesting? I think the story of Birkenstock and that company that's been around since the 1700s, two brothers going from generation to generation, IPO, the company's worth $3.4 billion. That's a really exciting story, even though shareholders didn't really seem to think so. What company news locally and internationally are you watching and are you interested in?
Yeah, so I think, at the moment we are heading into earnings season, particularly in the US. So looking to see how resilient earnings will be. There is quite a lot of individual stock news, to look out for. We speak of crises, but, really there's a lot of innovation as well. On the energy front, some of the counters actually doing quite well. A bit of a challenge, from a investment perspective is some of these don't have enough liquidity or breadth for us to actually invest meaningfully in them. But certainly constantly looking out for these opportunities as they arise.
Okay, Ricardo Smith, thank you so much, CIO at ABSA Investments. Thanks for your time and insight on SABC News this afternoon.